I'm not sitting next to a ghetto trash who printed a fake ticket at home. Lillian Moore screamed, towering over Naomi Carter, who is seated on seat 2A. Lillian whipped out her phone and started live streaming, gleefully accusing Naomi of fraud to her thousands of followers. "Watch me expose this criminal," she bragged, demanding security arrest the scammer. Lillian thought she was a hero protecting the cabin. She didn't realize she was broadcasting her own career suicide. The quiet woman she was attacking wasn't a scammer. She was Naomi Carter, the founder and CEO of the very airline Lillian was standing on. And Lillian just handed her boss a 4K video evidence for a lawsuit that would ruin her. Lillian stood in the aisle, her face twisted with righteous fury, one finger stabbing toward the woman in seat 2A like an accusation made flesh. "This woman is a fraud!" Lillian's voice cut through the pre-flight murmur like a blade. "And I'm streaming this live, so everyone can see." Passengers turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. A child 2 rows back stopped coloring. The cabin attendants near the galley froze, caught between protocol and shock. Naomi Carter sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, spine straight against the leather seat. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, nothing designer, nothing flashy. Her face remained composed, but her knuckles had gone white against the armrest. Lillian shoved her phone closer, the camera lens inches from Naomi's face. "Look at her! She knows she's caught, trying to steal a first-class seat like nobody would notice." "Ma'am, please step back." A flight attendant named Rosa appeared beside Lillian, voice strained with forced calm. "You're blocking the aisle. I'll move when security removes this criminal from my section." Lillian didn't lower the phone. Her screen showed 347 live viewers and climbing. Comments scrolled past in a blur of emojis and outrage. Naomi's lips parted slightly. "Please stop filming me." "Oh, she speaks." Lillian laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Now she wants privacy? Should have thought about that before committing fraud." The cabin felt smaller suddenly, air thick with tension and the recycled breath of 60 witnesses. Some passengers leaned forward, eager for drama. Others studied their phones, pretending invisibility. No one intervened. 3 hours earlier, Naomi had stood in the security line at Northport International Airport like anyone else. No assistant, no priority lane, no special treatment. She'd chosen this deliberately, traveling alone, blending in, taking the temperature of her own operation from the passenger side. She did this twice a year, unannounced, booking tickets under her personal name rather than corporate credentials. The airport had been in ordinary chaos, families juggling strollers, business travelers barking into phones, the usual symphony of rolling luggage and gate announcements. Naomi had collected her carry-on from the X-ray belt, nodded thanks to the TSA agent, and walked toward Gate 23 without drawing a single glance. She liked it that way. Preferred it, actually. The boardroom commanded attention. The airport allowed anonymity. Here she could observe without the distortion of deference, could see what passengers really experienced when her name wasn't attached. Boarding had been smooth. Group 2 called, tickets scanned, down the jetway. She'd found seat 2A and settled in, placing her bag in the overhead bin without assistance. The seat was good. Aisle access, extra leg room, the subtle luxury her company had designed into their premium cabin. A woman across the aisle had glanced at her, then away quickly. Nothing unusual. Naomi was used to that particular look. The brief assessment, the mental calculation, the conclusion that she didn't quite fit the first-class demographic. She'd learned to let it slide off like water. But Lillian Moore wasn't content with silent judgment. Lillian had boarded in Group 1, dragging a designer roller bag that barely fit the size restrictions. She wore head-to-toe athleisure, expensive, logo-heavy, the kind that screamed wealth rather than whispered it. Her hair was blown out to impossible volume. Her nails were stiletto-sharp and painted crimson. She'd stopped cold when she saw Naomi in 2A. Her eyes had narrowed. swept from Naomi's unremarkable sweater to her worn sneakers to her makeup-free face. Lillian's lip had curled just slightly before she continued to her own seat. 2C, window side. The first comment had come 5 minutes later, loud enough to carry. "They're really letting anyone in here now, aren't they?" Naomi had kept her eyes on her book, a paperback thriller she'd been meaning to finish for months. She'd learned long ago that engagement only fed certain fires. Silence was armor. Lillian hadn't appreciated the lack of response. She'd tried again, leaning toward the man in 2B, a nervous-looking businessman who clearly wanted no part of whatever was brewing. "I fly this route monthly. First class used to mean something, now it's just—" She'd waved a hand vaguely in Naomi's direction. "Random people who probably can't even afford it." The businessman had made a non-committal sound and buried himself deeper in his laptop. Naomi had turned a page, kept reading, refused the bait. That's when Lillian had stood up, suddenly decisive, and flagged down Rosa. "Excuse me, I think there's been a seating error." Rosa had approached with professional warmth. "What seems to be the problem?" "That woman," Lillian pointed. "She's in my daughter's seat. My daughter was supposed to sit there, but she had to cancel last minute. I'm certain the airline wouldn't just give it away to—" She'd paused meaningfully. "Someone random." Rosa's smile had tightened at the edges. "Ma'am, all seats are assigned by our system. If that's her assigned seat, well, check then, because I don't believe it." Rosa had turned to Naomi, apology already forming in her expression. "Miss, may I see your boarding pass?" Naomi had handed it over without comment. The pass was standard. Name, seat assignment, confirmation code. Everything in order. Rosa had scanned it with her handheld device. "This is correct. Seat 2A, confirmed." "That's impossible." Lillian had snatched the boarding pass from Rosa's hand, studying it like a forgery. "What name is this? Naomi Carter? That doesn't sound right. Run it again." "Ma'am, I've already confirmed." "Then your system is wrong." Lillian's volume had increased, drawing more attention. "I want to speak to the captain. This woman is clearly using a fraudulent ticket. I've worked in aviation. I know how these scams work." That's when she'd pulled out her phone, opened her social media app, hit the live button. "Good afternoon, everyone," she'd said into the camera, voice suddenly smooth and conspiratorial. "You're not going to believe what I'm witnessing right now on Horizon Crest Airlines. A woman has somehow gotten into first class, and I'm watching in real time as the crew tries to cover for her." Naomi's stomach had sunk. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, entitled customers, people who mistook service for servitude. But this was different. This was public, viral, weaponized. Lillian. Rosa's professionalism had frayed slightly. "You need to end that stream and sit down. Filming other passengers without consent violates." "Violates what? My right to document fraud? I'm a paying customer. I have every right to protect myself and others from criminals." The word had landed like a slap. Criminal. Naomi had felt heat creep up her neck, a flush of humiliation she hadn't experienced since childhood. Around them, phones had appeared in other passengers' hands. Some recording Lillian, others recording Naomi. Everyone documenting everything. The businessman in 2B had finally spoken up, voice quiet but firm. "Ma'am, you're making a scene over nothing. Her ticket's valid. Just sit down." Lillian had rounded on him. "Oh, you're defending her? That's rich. Let me guess. You think I'm being unreasonable? You think I should just accept that standards don't matter anymore?" "I think you're harassing another passenger." "I'm exposing a fraud." Lillian had thrust her phone toward Naomi again, the lens filling with her face. "Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in first class? Does anything about this seem legitimate to you?" Naomi's jaw tightened. She'd weathered boardroom hostility, shareholder revolts, media scrutiny that dissected every decision she made. But sitting trapped in an airline seat while a stranger broadcast her humiliation to hundreds felt uniquely suffocating. The urge to stand, to speak, to defend herself burned in her chest. Instead, she did what years of strategic thinking had taught her. She waited. "Miss Carter?" Rosa's voice dropped lower, meant only for Naomi. "Would you be more comfortable if we moved you to another seat?" The question, though kindly intended, stung worse than Lillian's accusations. Moving would confirm guilt, would suggest she'd done something wrong, something that required accommodation and apology. Naomi shook her head once, sharp and definitive. "I'm staying in my assigned seat." Lillian's laugh was vicious. "Of course she's staying. Why would she give up a free upgrade? She probably does this on every flight, books economy, then tries to sneak into first class, hoping nobody notices." "That's not what happened," Rosa said, voice strained. "Her ticket is legitimate. I verified." "Then your verification system is broken." Lillian pivoted to address her phone again. Her audience now passed 800 viewers. "This is what's wrong with airlines today, folks. No accountability, no standards. They'll let anyone sit anywhere as long as it avoids confrontation. Well, I'm not afraid of confrontation. Someone has to stand up for what's right." A flight attendant named Evan approached from the forward galley, his expression tight with barely concealed frustration. He was younger than Rosa, less practiced at masking emotion. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to end the live stream. You're disrupting the boarding process." "I'll end it when she's removed from this aircraft. She has a valid ticket." "Then explain to me how someone dressed like that affords a $2,000 seat." Lillian gestured at Naomi's clothes with theatrical disdain. "Look at her shoes. Those are discount store sneakers. Her bag is generic. She's not even wearing jewelry. Does that scream first-class passenger to you?" Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman in row 3 whispered something to her husband. A teenager across the aisle filmed everything on his phone, his face lit with the glow of potential viral content. Evan's jaw worked. How someone dresses is irrelevant. She purchased her ticket. She has every right to be here. "I want her ID checked," Lillian demanded. "I want proof she is who she claims to be, because I'm telling you right now, this is identity theft. Someone probably stole a credit card and bought this ticket, and you're all too scared of bad press to do anything about it." Naomi felt the walls closing in. Every eye in first class was on her now. The businessman in 2B had abandoned any pretense of neutrality and was staring openly. The family in row 4 watched with the hungry fascination of spectators at an accident. Even the flight crew seemed unsure how to proceed, trapped between policy and the path of least resistance. "Ma'am," Naomi said quietly, looking directly at Lillian for the first time, "I understand you're upset, but I promise you, there's been no mistake. This is my seat. I paid for it. I have every right to be here." Her voice was calm, measured, carefully stripped of any emotion that could be weaponized against her. It was the voice she used in negotiations, when revealing nothing was the strongest position. Lillian's expression twisted with something beyond anger, something closer to vindication. "There it is. Did everyone hear that? She's trying to sound reasonable now, trying to make me look like the problem. This is classic criminal behavior. Deflect, deny, make yourself the victim." "Nobody's calling you the problem," Evan interjected. "But you need to sit down so we can finish boarding." "I'll sit down when justice is served." Lillian's phone was still raised, still broadcasting. Her viewer count had climbed past 1,200. Comments scrolled by in a toxic stream. "Make her show receipts." She definitely scammed her way in. "Why isn't security involved? This is what's wrong with society." A handful of comments defended Naomi, but they were drowned in the tide of presumption and prejudice. Rosa made a decision. "I'm calling the captain." "Finally," Lillian crowed. "Yes, get the captain involved. Get someone with actual authority who understands protocol." Rosa retreated toward the cockpit, her shoulders rigid with stress. Evan remained, a human barrier between Lillian and Naomi, though his presence did little to stop the verbal assault. "You know what's interesting?" Lillian addressed her phone again, her tone shifting to faux academic analysis. "I've been flying for 20 years. I've seen a lot of scams, and they all have The same pattern. Someone who doesn't belong tries to blend in, stays quiet, hopes nobody asks questions, but the moment you shine a light on them, they fall apart. She hasn't fallen apart, the businessman in 2B muttered. You have. Lillian's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? You heard me. This woman has been nothing but polite while you've spent 10 minutes accusing her of crimes with zero evidence. If anyone should be removed from this flight, it's you. Several passengers murmured agreement. A woman in row 1 said, Seriously, just sit down already. But Lillian was too far committed to retreat. She'd made accusations publicly, staked her credibility on being right. Backing down now would make her the villain of her own live stream. Oh, I see how this is, she said, voice rising. Now I'm the bad guy for trying to protect everyone from fraud? This is exactly what's wrong with society. People are so terrified of being called out that they'd rather enable criminals than risk looking judgmental. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, summoning patience from reserves she hadn't known she possessed. Every instinct screamed at her to stand, to announce who she was, to end this nightmare, with 4 words. I own this airline. But revealing her identity now, in anger, would feel like using a weapon. And she'd spent her career proving she didn't need weapons, just strategy, patience, and the willingness to let others expose themselves. Captain Michael Hale emerged from the cockpit, his presence immediately commanding. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of calm authority that comes from years of handling emergencies. His eyes swept the cabin, taking in the scene with practiced assessment. What's the situation? He asked Rosa quietly. She explained in quick, low tones. Lillian's accusations. Naomi's valid ticket. The live stream that had turned boarding into a spectacle. Captain Hale's expression hardened. He approached Lillian directly. Ma'am, I'm Captain Hale. I understand there's a dispute about seating. Finally, someone who'll take this seriously. Lillian angled her phone to capture him. Captain, this woman is using a fraudulent ticket. I'm certain of it. She doesn't belong in first class, and your crew is refusing to address it. The crew has verified her ticket multiple times. It's legitimate. Then your system is compromised. I'm telling you as someone with aviation industry experience. What experience is that? Captain Hale's tone was polite but pointed. Lillian faltered for half a second. I've worked with airlines, consulted on customer experience. I know how these systems work, and I know when something's wrong. Then you know that making false accusations against passengers is grounds for removal from the aircraft. The cabin went silent. Even Lillian's live stream chat seemed to pause, comments slowing as viewers sensed a shift. False accusations? Lillian's voice pitched higher. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to protect your airline from fraud, and you're threatening me? I'm informing you of policy. Every passenger aboard this aircraft has been verified. If you cannot accept that and take your seat, I'll have no choice but to ask you to deplane. Lillian's face flushed crimson. Her phone trembled slightly in her hand. You can't be serious. Completely serious. Sit down, end the live stream, and allow us to complete boarding, or leave the aircraft voluntarily. For a moment, Naomi thought Lillian might actually comply. Thought the threat of removal might penetrate the armor of righteous certainty she'd built around herself. Instead, Lillian doubled down. No, she said flatly. I paid for this seat. I'm not moving until she does, and I'm not ending my stream until everyone sees how this airline protects criminals over paying customers. You want to remove me? Fine, but it'll be on camera, and the whole world will know how Horizon Crest treats loyal passengers. Captain Hale's jaw tightened. He glanced at Naomi, then back to Lillian. Last chance, ma'am. Sit down or deplane. Make me. Captain Hale's expression shifted from patience to decision in the span of a heartbeat. He turned to Evan and spoke quietly, words clipped and final. Call ground security. Inform them we have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions. She'll need to be escorted off. Lillian's confidence cracked at the edges. You're serious? You're actually calling security on ME? You refuse to follow crew instructions. You're disrupting the boarding process. Yes, I'm serious. The live stream erupted. Comments flooded past, some supporting Lillian, others celebrating the impending removal, everyone feeding on the spectacle. Lillian's hands shook as she kept the phone raised, her voice taking on a manic edge. You're all witnessing this, right? I'm being removed for trying to protect passengers, for exposing fraud. This is what happens when you speak truth to power. They silence you. Naomi felt a headache forming behind her eyes. This had spiraled so far beyond reason that recovery seemed impossible. Even if Lillian left quietly now, the damage was done. The video would spread. The story would mutate with each retelling. By tomorrow, she'd be an internet mystery. The woman accused of stealing a first-class seat, identity unknown, fate unresolved. 2 airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door within minutes, their presence immediately changing the cabin's energy. They wore crisp uniforms and carried the weight of authority that came with badges and protocol. The older of the 2, a woman with steel gray, hair pulled back severely, surveyed the scene with weary recognition. "Captain Hale," she said. "What's the situation?" Passenger in 2C refuses to follow crew instructions and end a disruptive live stream. She's made repeated accusations against another passenger despite verification of proper documentation. She's refused multiple requests to sit down and comply. The security officer turned to Lillian. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Denise Pruitt. I need you to end your live stream and gather your belongings." "I'm not going anywhere." Lillian's voice pitched toward hysteria. "That woman is a fraud, and nobody will listen to me. I have rights. I paid for this seat." "You have the right to deplane voluntarily or be escorted off. Those are your options." "This is discrimination. You're removing me because I'm telling the truth about her." Lillian jabbed her finger toward Naomi again. "Check her ID. Make her prove she's supposed to be." "Here." Officer Pruitt's partner, a younger man with a name tag reading Martinez, stepped forward. "We can verify everyone's identification if that would resolve this." Naomi's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment where she could end everything. Pull out her ID, let them see the name that matched the company logo on every surface of this aircraft. Watch Lillian's face as reality crashed through her certainty. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the principle of the thing. She shouldn't have to prove her right to exist in a space she'd paid for. Perhaps it was curiosity about how far this would go before collapsing under its own weight. Or perhaps it was the cold calculation that revealing her identity under duress would look like privilege, protecting itself rather than truth emerging naturally. "That's fine," Naomi said quietly. She reached for her bag beneath the seat in front of her, movements deliberate and calm. Lillian's expression flickered between triumph and uncertainty. Her live stream chat exploded with speculation. She's going to run. She knows she's caught. Watch her try to talk her way out. Naomi pulled out her wallet, extracted her driver's license, and handed it to Officer Pruitt without comment. Pruitt examined it briefly, then glanced at Naomi's face for confirmation. Something shifted in the officer's expression, a subtle tightening around her eyes, a pause that lasted a fraction too long. She looked at the license again, then at Naomi, then back to the license. "This is your current ID?" Pruitt asked, voice carefully neutral. "Yes, ma'am." Pruitt handed it to Martinez, who studied it with the same dawning recognition. He cleared his throat, exchanged a glance with his partner, then looked at Captain Hale with an expression that was equal parts discomfort and disbelief. "Captain," Martinez said quietly, "could we speak privately for a moment?" Lillian sensed the shift immediately. "What? What's wrong? Is it fake? I knew it was fake." "Ma'am, please remain calm," Pruitt said. But her attention had moved away from Lillian entirely. She was looking at Naomi with something approaching mortification. Captain Hale stepped aside with the security officers, their huddle barely out of earshot. Naomi couldn't hear the words, but she watched Hale's body language transform, spine straightening, jaw slackening slightly, one hand coming up to rub his forehead in a gesture of pure stress. "What's happening?" the businessman in 2B asked nobody in particular. "Why are they acting weird?" Lillian's stream chat was in chaos. "Something's happening." The security officer's look shook. Did she show them something? What's going on? When the huddle broke, Captain Hale's face had drained of color. He approached Naomi with the kind of careful deference usually reserved for dignitaries or disasters. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "I apologize. If I'd known—" "You had no reason to know," Naomi interrupted gently. "You were doing your job. Everyone was." "Known what?" Lillian's voice rose to a shriek. "What's going on? Why are you apologizing to her?" Officer Pruitt turned to Lillian with an expression that suggested she'd just watched someone drive off a cliff in slow motion. "Ma'am, you need to come with us now. Not until someone tells me what's happening." "You've made serious accusations against a passenger on a public platform," Martinez said. "Those accusations were false. You've been asked repeatedly to comply with crew instructions and refused. You're being removed from this aircraft." "False? How are they false? Did you even check her ID?" "We checked it." Pruitt's tone was flat. "I suggest you stop talking now and come with us voluntarily." But Lillian had gone too far to turn back. "I want to know who—" "She is. I want to know why everyone's suddenly protecting her. What did she show you?" Naomi closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. She'd wanted to avoid this, wanted to handle the situation without pulling rank, without using her position as a shield. But Lillian had backed everyone into a corner where silence was no longer an option. She stood slowly, movements controlled and deliberate. Every eye in first class tracked her. The cabin had gone silent except for the ambient hum of ventilation and the distant sound of ground crew loading baggage. "My name is Naomi Carter," she said clearly, voice carrying to every corner of the cabin. "I'm the founder and CEO of Horizon Crest Airlines." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lillian's livestream chat seemed to freeze, comments stopping mid-scroll as viewers processed what they'd just heard. Lillian's face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, then disbelief, then dawning horror as the implications crashed over her. Her phone dipped slightly, the camera angle tilting downward as her hand lost strength. No, that's not—" Lillian's voice had lost all conviction. "You're lying. That's a lie." "It's not," Captain Hale said quietly. "Ms. Carter owns this airline. She books personal travel under her own name. We didn't recognize her because she doesn't travel with an entourage or special markings. She prefers to experience her company's service as a regular passenger." The businessman in 2B let out a low whistle. "Oh my God! You—" Lillian looked at Naomi, then at her phone, then back at Naomi. The live stream was still running, still broadcasting, every accusation, every insult, every moment of self-righteous fury, captured and distributed to nearly 2,000 viewers. "You should have said something. You should have told me who you were." "Why?" Naomi's voice was quiet, but cut through the cabin, like a blade. "So you'd treat me with respect? Because my position demands it? What about the person you thought I was? Didn't she deserve respect too?" Lillian's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Her face had gone from crimson to ash pale. "Hold on a minute." Lillian just learned the hardest lesson of her life, on camera, for thousands to see. If you believe actions have consequences, hit that like button right now. Subscribe, because stories about accountability don't tell themselves. They need your support to reach people who need to hear them. And share this. Share it with that person who needs to understand that assumptions destroy lives. 3 clicks. Lillian broadcast her hate for thousands. You can broadcast this truth just as easily. "You assumed I didn't belong here based on how I looked," Naomi continued, voice still measured but weighted with something harder now. "You assumed my ticket was fraudulent. You called me a criminal. You broadcast those accusations to thousands of people, and not once, not for a single moment, Did you consider that you might be wrong? I was trying to protect. Lillian's phone finally lowered, the live stream camera pointing at the floor. But she hadn't ended it. Thousands were still watching, still listening to every word. Protect what? Naomi asked. Your sense of who belongs in first class? Your assumptions about what wealth looks like? Your belief that certain people deserve certain spaces and others don't? This isn't fair. Lillian's voice had shrunk to something small and desperate. You set me up. You could have stopped this at any time. You're the owner. You could have just said so and none of this would have happened. You're right, Naomi agreed. I could have. And then you would have apologized, sat down, and learned absolutely nothing. You would have treated me with respect because of my position while continuing to judge and humiliate everyone else you deemed unworthy. So I let you show everyone exactly who you are when you think there are no consequences. Officer Pruitt stepped forward, voice professional but edged with satisfaction. Ma'am, you need to come with us, now. Lillian looked around the cabin desperately, seeking support or sympathy. She found neither. Passengers who'd been recording now looked away, embarrassed by their own complicity. The businessman in 2B shook his head slowly. Even the teenager who'd been filming deleted his video on the spot. Lillian's hands trembled as she reached for her designer bag in the overhead compartment. The movement was mechanical, defeated. All her earlier bravado evaporated like steam. Her phone was still clutched in one hand, the live stream still active, though she seemed to have forgotten it entirely. The camera captured her fumbling with the bag, the designer logo now looking less like status and more like costume. I didn't mean, she started, voice barely audible. I was just trying to. You meant every word, Naomi said quietly. You believed every accusation. Own that at least. Officer Martinez gently took Lillian's elbow, guiding her toward the aisle. She moved like someone in shock, her feet catching on nothing, her expensive athleisure suddenly looking ridiculous against the reality of her situation. As she passed Naomi's row, Lillian stopped, turned. Her eyes were wet now, mascara beginning to smudge at the corners. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You're sorry you were wrong about who I am, Naomi interrupted, voice still that same measured calm. Not sorry about what you did. There's a difference. Lillian opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. What defense could she offer? Every word she'd spoken was recorded, every accusation documented, every moment of cruelty preserved in digital amber for the world to dissect. The walk to the aircraft door took less than 30 seconds but felt infinite. Every passenger watched. Some with satisfaction, others with second-hand embarrassment, all of them recognizing they were witnessing a social execution in real time. At the door, Lillian turned back one final time. My phone, the live stream, I should end it. Leave it running, Officer Pruitt said flatly. Let everyone see the consequences. They escorted her off. The cabin remained frozen for several heartbeats after she disappeared, the silence heavy with processing and disbelief. Then, like a spell breaking, movement and sound returned. Passengers shifted in their seats. Whispered conversations erupted. Phones came out, not to record Naomi, but to text friends, to check social media, to see if the live stream was as viral as they suspected. Rosa approached Naomi's seat, face flushed with a mixture of relief and mortification. Ms. Carter, I'm so incredibly sorry. If we'd known... Rosa, you handled it exactly right, Naomi said, gesturing for her to sit in the now empty 2C. You verified my ticket. You called for backup when the situation escalated. You followed protocol perfectly. But you shouldn't have had to endure that. No, Naomi agreed. But neither should any passenger. That's the point. This wasn't about me specifically. It was about what passengers experience when they don't have power or position to protect them. Captain Hale reappeared, his earlier composure fully restored but edged with visible stress. Ms. Carter, on behalf of Horizon Crest, I want to apologize for what just occurred. That passenger's behavior was completely unacceptable, and I'm deeply sorry you were subjected to it. Captain, you removed a disruptive passenger using appropriate protocols. That's exactly what I'd expect from my crew. Naomi paused. What I'm more interested in is what happens next. That woman broadcast her accusations to thousands of people. By the time we land, this will be everywhere. How we respond matters. Hale nodded slowly. What would you like us to do? Nothing yet. Let's see how it unfolds organically first. Naomi's expression was thoughtful. Sometimes the best response is allowing consequences to speak for themselves. The flight departed 20 minutes late, but the delay barely registered against the weight of what had occurred. As the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, passengers gradually returned to normal behaviors, opening laptops, ordering drinks, streaming movies. But the energy remained charged, everyone acutely aware they'd witnessed something that would reverberate far beyond this single flight. The businessman in 2B finally introduced himself. I'm David Chen. I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner. I should have shut her down the moment she started. You did speak up, Naomi reminded him. You told her to sit down. You called her out for making a scene. That took courage. Not nearly enough. David looked uncomfortable. I was worried about making it worse, about being that guy who causes drama. But watching you sit there, taking all that abuse with such dignity, I realized my comfort was costing you yours. That's the calculation everyone makes, Naomi said. Intervening feels risky. Staying quiet feels safe. But silence has a cost too. It just gets paid by someone else. By the time the flight attendants began beverage service, Lillian's live stream had been viewed over 50,000 times. Clips were circulating on every platform. The internet had done what it does best: amplified, dissected, and rendered judgment at lightning speed. Naomi pulled out her laptop and logged into her secure company portal. Her assistant had already sent 3 urgent messages. Her communications director had sent 7. Her legal team had prepared a draft statement. Everyone wanted to know how she wanted to handle the situation. She typed a brief response. Let it breathe. No statement yet. Monitor for 24 hours. Then she opened a different folder, passenger complaint data from the past year. She scrolled through reports of discrimination, profiling, humiliation, passengers removed from flights for suspicious behavior. That was anything but. Families separated because gate agents didn't believe they could afford their seats. People subjected to additional screening because their names or appearances triggered biases. This happened constantly. The only difference today was that it happened to her, and her identity had provided consequences most victims never saw. An hour into the flight, Rosa approached again with a drink Naomi hadn't ordered. Sparkling water with lime, compliments of the crew. Naomi smiled. Thank you, but I don't need special treatment. It's not special treatment, it's an apology, and maybe a small acknowledgement that you handled something terrible with more grace than most people could manage. Rosa hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you tell her who you were right away? It would have ended everything instantly. Naomi considered the question carefully. Because revealing my position would have made this about power and hierarchy. She would have apologized because I'm her boss's boss's boss, not because what she did was wrong. And the next time she encountered someone without power, she'd do the exact same thing. So you let her expose herself. I let her make choices. She made bad ones. Now she lives with them. Naomi could have ended this instantly by pulling rank. Instead, she let Lillian expose herself completely, so the lesson would stick. That took patience you and I rarely have. So here's your test. Will you scroll past this story, taking the easy path? Or will you like, subscribe, and share, putting in the minimal effort to make sure this lesson reaches others? Naomi sacrificed her comfort for education. You're being asked for 3 seconds. If you can't do that, what does that say about you? Rosa nodded slowly. The whole thing's going viral. People are trying to figure out who you are. But your company bio doesn't have photos, and you don't do media appearances, so most people still don't know. That'll change soon enough. Naomi took a sip of the sparkling water. By tonight, my face will be everywhere. That's fine. It was always going to happen eventually. Are you worried about the exposure? I'm worried about what happens to people who can't defend themselves. People who get accused and removed and humiliated without cameras recording or CEOs revealing themselves. Naomi's expression hardened slightly. This moment is getting attention because of who I am. But it should get attention regardless of who the victim is. Meanwhile, in a sterile airport security office, Lillian sat across from Officer Pruitt and a representative from airport administration. Her live stream had finally been ended. Not by her choice, but because airport policy prohibited recording in secure areas. The video remained online, though, racking up views and spawning countless reaction videos. Ms. Moore, the administrator began, his voice professionally neutral. You're being issued a citation for disruptive behavior and failure to comply with crew instructions. You're also being banned from Horizon Crest Airlines pending further review. Banned? Lillian's voice cracked. You can't ban me. I fly constantly for work. You accused a passenger of fraud, refused multiple requests to cease disruptive behavior, and live-streamed the entire incident against airline policy. The ban is effective immediately. Lillian slumped in her chair. This is insane. I made a mistake, okay? I didn't know who she was. If she just said something... That's exactly the problem, Pruitt interrupted. You think her identity is what made your behavior wrong. It's not. Harassing any passenger would have been wrong. The fact that she's the CEO just means there are actual consequences. What am I supposed to do? That video is everywhere. Everyone's going to see it. My job, my reputation. You should have considered that before hitting the livestream button, the administrator said flatly. You're free to go. Check your email within 48 hours for formal notification of the ban and any additional actions. Lillian left the office on shaking legs, her phone clutched to her chest like a shield. Outside, the terminal continued its ordinary chaos. Announcements, rolling luggage, travelers focused on their own journeys. Nobody recognized her yet. Nobody pointed or whispered. But they would. Soon. She opened her phone with trembling fingers and navigated to her social media. The live stream had been viewed 73,000 times. Her follower count had exploded. People flocking to witness the aftermath. But the comments made her stomach turn. This is what racism looks like. She assumed a black woman couldn't afford first class. Hope she loses everything. This is karma in real time. Lillian wanted to defend herself, to explain, to make people understand she wasn't racist. She was just concerned, just trying to help. But every explanation died on her tongue because deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine, she knew they were right. She had made assumptions, had seen Naomi's clothes, her lack of flashy accessories, her quiet demeanor, and concluded she didn't belong. And if she was honest, truly, painfully honest, race had been part of that calculation. Not consciously, perhaps. Not with explicit malice. But the bias had been there, invisible and insidious, shaping her perceptions and justifying her actions. Her phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor. We need to talk. Call me immediately. Another text. This one from her mother. What have you done? It's all over Facebook. A third from her best friend. Please tell me that wasn't you. Lillian silenced her phone and stared at the departures board, watching destinations flicker and change. Somewhere above her, Naomi Carter was probably sipping that sparkling water, reading a book, existing in the first-class seat she'd earned and paid for. Meanwhile, Lillian sat in an airport terminal, unemployed, banned, and infamous. The consequences she'd dismissed so casually when threatening others had arrived for her with crushing finality. The flight landed at Westbridge International 3 hours later. The touchdown smooth despite the turbulence that had shaken the cabin over the Rockies. Naomi gathered her things with the same quiet efficiency she displayed throughout, nodding thanks to Rosa as she prepared to deplane. But Captain Hale intercepted her at the aircraft door, his expression somewhere between professional and pleading. "Ms. Carter, there's media at the gate. Word got out. If you'd prefer, we can arrange a different exit." Naomi considered this. The easy path would be to slip away, avoid the questions, let her communications team craft the narrative later. But that would leave a vacuum, and vacuums filled with speculation rather than truth. "I'll go through the main terminal," she said, "but I won't be making a formal statement. Just a brief acknowledgement." The jetway felt longer than usual, each step taking her closer to a visibility she'd deliberately avoided for years. She'd built Horizon Crest from nothing. 3 planes and a dream 15 years ago. Now, fleet of 70 aircraft serving 32 destinations. She'd done it while maintaining ruthless privacy, her executive team fielding media requests, her COO appearing at industry conferences, her face conspicuously absent from the company's public image. That anonymity had ended the moment Lillian pressed record. The gate area erupted when she appeared. Reporters surged forward, cameras raised, questions overlapping into incomprehensible noise. Airport security formed a loose perimeter, but the crowd pressed close enough that Naomi could see individual faces, hungry for story, for scandal, for whatever narrative would generate clicks. "Ms. Carter, can you comment on the incident? Are you pressing charges against the passenger? How does it feel being racially profiled on your own airline? Will there be policy changes after this?" Naomi stopped walking and raised one hand. The gesture was small but carried authority, and remarkably, the crowd quieted. "I'm not making a formal statement," she said, voice clear but not loud. "What happened today happens to passengers every day. They're questioned, doubted, humiliated because someone makes assumptions about who they are based on how they look. The only difference today was that it happened to me, and my position meant there were consequences. I'd ask everyone covering this story to remember that the issue isn't one passenger's behavior. It's the systems and biases that make that behavior feel justified. Will you ban the passenger permanently? That's an operational decision that will be made according to our policies and procedures." Next question. "Do you think she was motivated by racism?" Naomi paused, choosing words carefully. "I think she was motivated by assumptions. Whether those assumptions were racist is for her to examine. What I know is that bias, conscious or unconscious, shapes how we treat each other. And airlines, like all institutions, have to actively work against those biases rather than simply hoping they don't exist." "Are you planning to sue?" "No. The consequences she's facing are sufficient." "What consequences?" "The ones she created for herself when she chose to broadcast her behavior to thousands of people. I don't need to add to them. Reality is doing that work just fine." Naomi fielded 3 more questions before politely excusing herself. Security escorted her through the terminal, past gates and shops and clusters of travelers who recognized her from videos they'd watched minutes earlier. Some pointed. A few applauded. One woman stopped her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said quietly. "I've been kicked off flights twice for looking suspicious. Nobody believed me. Nobody cared. Seeing what happened to you, seeing there be consequences, it matters. It really matters." Naomi squeezed the woman's hand. "I'm sorry that happened to you. It shouldn't have. But it did, and it will again, unless things change." "Then we change them," Naomi said simply. Outside, her car waited. A modest sedan, not the luxury vehicle people probably expected. Her driver, Marcus, had been with her for 8 years and knew better than to ask questions during the short ride to her downtown office. Instead, he offered what he always offered: steady presence and jazz on the radio, letting the saxophone fill the silence. At Horizon Crest headquarters, her executive team had assembled in the main conference room. Naomi could see them through the glass walls as she approached, her COO pacing, her general counsel reviewing documents, her communications director typing furiously on her laptop. They looked up as one when she entered, expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed panic. "Before anyone speaks," Naomi said, setting her bag on the table, "let me be clear. We're not in crisis mode. We're in opportunity mode." Her COO, James Rodriguez, blinked. "Opportunity? Naomi, you were publicly humiliated on one of our flights. The video has 3 million views. Every news outlet is running the story. Our stock dipped 2% in after-hours trading. And it'll recover," Naomi said calmly. "Because we're going to handle this correctly. Stephanie, what's legal's assessment?" Stephanie Chen, the general counsel, adjusted her glasses. "The passenger violated multiple policies. We're within our rights to maintain the ban. She could potentially sue for defamation or claim discrimination herself, but given the video evidence, any suit would be frivolous." "Good. Make sure the ban letter is professionally worded but firm. No ambiguity." Naomi turned to her communications director. "Rachel, what's the media temperature?" Rachel Martinez looked up from her laptop. "Mixed. Some outlets are framing it as karmic justice, entitled 'Passenger Gets Owned.' Others are focusing on the racial dynamics and systemic issues. A few are criticizing you for not identifying yourself sooner, claiming you set her up. But overall, public sentiment is strongly in your favor. The passenger is getting destroyed online. Define destroyed. Her employer put her on administrative leave 3 hours ago. She's been identified across multiple platforms. People are digging through her old social media posts and finding problematic content. Someone created a petition to ban her from all airlines. It has 40,000 signatures. Her personal information is being shared. It's getting ugly." Naomi felt a flicker of something uncomfortable. She'd wanted consequences, yes, accountability, but the internet's capacity for cruelty sometimes exceeded even justified anger. "Monitor that situation," she said. "If it crosses into harassment or threats, we issue a statement condemning it. She made terrible choices, but she doesn't deserve to be terrorized." James leaned forward. "With respect, some people would argue she deserves exactly what she's getting. She tried to humiliate you publicly. Now she's experiencing public humiliation herself. And that's sufficient. We don't need to pile on. We're better than that." Naomi pulled up a chair. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we're launching an immediate review of our passenger complaint data from the past 3 years. I want to know how many people have been removed from flights, challenged about their seats, or subjected to additional screening. I want demographic breakdowns. I want to identify patterns." Stephanie made notes. "That's going to reveal some uncomfortable truths." "Good. We publish them anyway. Transparently, along with our plan to address them." "You want to publicize our failures?" James looked incredulous. "I want to publicize our commitment to fixing them. If we hide the data, we look defensive. If we release it with concrete action plans, we look accountable." Naomi's voice was firm. "Second, we're implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff. Not the generic corporate module. Actual, meaningful training with external facilitators who specialize in this work." Rachel typed rapidly. "That'll be expensive. Less expensive than lawsuits. Less expensive than losing passengers' trust. Less expensive than the cost of doing nothing." Naomi stood, moving to the window that overlooked the tarmac. 2 Horizon Crest planes were visible, their distinctive blue and silver livery gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "Third, we're establishing an independent passenger advocacy office. Passengers who feel they've been treated unfairly can file complaints that will be reviewed by people who don't report to operations or customer service. Real oversight, real accountability." James exchanged glances with Stephanie. "The board isn't going to love this. The cost, the admission of problems, the potential legal exposure. The board will accept it," Naomi said flatly, "because I'm the majority shareholder and this is non-negotiable. We built this airline on the promise of bringing dignity to air travel. Today proved we're failing that promise for too many passengers. We fix it, or we lose the right to claim that mission." The room fell silent. Finally, Rachel spoke. "For what it's worth, I think this is exactly the right response. We'll get some pushback from people who think you're being too hard on the company. But long term, this positions us as an industry leader in addressing systemic issues. I'm not interested in positioning, Naomi said quietly. I'm interested in being better, doing better, making sure what happened today doesn't happen tomorrow. Over the next 24 hours, Lillian Moore's world continued its spectacular collapse. Her employer, a mid-sized marketing firm, issued a terse statement announcing her termination, effective immediately due to conduct inconsistent with company values. Her landlord contacted her about complaints from neighbors who'd recognized her from the video. Her social media accounts, initially set to private, were hacked and exposed, revealing years of posts that ranged from casually insensitive to overtly prejudiced. She'd posted complaints about those people moving into her neighborhood. She'd shared memes about welfare recipients that used racist dog whistles. She'd commented on news articles about police violence with just comply rhetoric that ignored mountains of evidence about systemic racism. The video from the plane wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, now visible for anyone to see. Lillian's phone never stopped buzzing, journalists requesting interviews, former friends demanding explanations, strangers sending messages that ranged from supportive, "Don't let them destroy you," to vicious threats Lillian reported to police, but which kept coming anyway. She'd hired a crisis management consultant who'd advised her to issue a public apology. Lillian had drafted 17 versions, each one failing to thread the needle between taking responsibility and explaining her perspective. The consultant finally gave up. "You can't explain your way out of this," he'd said bluntly. "The video speaks for itself. Your social media history confirms it wasn't a one-time mistake. The best thing you can do is genuinely examine your biases, do the work to change, and hope that in a year or two people might accept that growth is possible." "A year or two?" Lillian had felt her chest tighten. "I'm supposed to just, what, hide? Let my life be destroyed?" "Your life isn't destroyed. Your reputation is damaged. There's a difference. But rebuilding, reputation takes time and genuine change, neither of which happens overnight." 3 days after the incident, Naomi sat in a television studio preparing for her first major interview. She'd agreed to appear on a national news program, not to discuss Lillian specifically, but to address the broader implications of what had occurred. The makeup artist finished powdering her face while the producer ran through timing and talking points. "We'll start with the incident itself," the producer explained. "Then transition to systemic issues in the airline industry. Then close with your company's response. Sound good?" Naomi nodded, though good felt like the wrong word. Necessary, perhaps. Important, but not good. The interview began with the host, veteran journalist Patricia Vance, displaying a clip from Lillian's live stream. Even edited for time, the cruelty was undeniable. Naomi watched herself on the monitor, quiet, composed, enduring, and felt a disconnect between the woman on screen and the woman she remembered being in that moment. "Ms. Carter," Patricia began, "watching this is uncomfortable for many reasons. But what strikes me most is your restraint. Why didn't you identify yourself immediately?" "Because identification shouldn't determine treatment," Naomi said. "Every passenger deserves respect, regardless of who they are or what position they hold. If I'd revealed my identity right away, it would have reinforced the idea that power protects you from discrimination. That's not the lesson I wanted taught. But you did eventually reveal it. What changed? The situation escalated beyond redemption. At that point, continuing to withhold my identity would have allowed her to maintain her certainty, her conviction that she was right. Sometimes people need reality to break through their assumptions. That's what happened." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Some critics say you set her up, that you could have prevented the entire situation but chose not to, essentially using her behavior to make a point." Naomi had anticipated this angle. "I made choices, yes. I chose not to immediately pull rank, but she made choices too. To assume, to accuse, to broadcast, to escalate. Nobody forced her to behave that way. She did it because she felt entitled to police who belonged in that space. The consequences she's facing are the natural result of her own actions being made visible. Those consequences have been severe. She's lost her job, been banned from your airline, and received significant online harassment. Do you feel any responsibility for that? I feel responsibility for creating an environment where her behavior felt justified in the first place, Naomi said carefully. Airlines have, for decades, allowed certain passengers to be treated as suspicious or illegitimate based on appearance, accent, or other factors. We've created cultures where bias goes unchallenged because confrontation feels uncomfortable. So yes, I accept responsibility for that systemic failure. But her specific choices, to accuse, to humiliate, to broadcast, those belong to her. You've announced significant policy changes at Horizon Crest. Walk us through those. Naomi detailed the Passenger Advocacy Office, the mandatory training, the Data Transparency Initiative. Patricia's questions were pointed but fair, probing the costs and challenges without veering into hostility. These changes will be expensive, Patricia noted. Some analysts estimate tens of millions annually. How do you justify that to shareholders? By reminding them that we're in the business of transporting people, not cargo. People deserve dignity. If we can't provide that, we don't deserve their business or their trust. The cost of doing this right is far less than the cost of continuing to do it wrong. And if other airlines don't follow your lead, if you're making expensive changes while competitors maintain the status quo, then we'll have the competitive advantage of passengers who trust us, who feel safe and respected when they fly with us. That's worth more than short-term savings on training budgets. The interview concluded with Patricia asking about Naomi's personal experience of discrimination. It was the question Naomi had been dreading, the one that required vulnerability. She usually kept locked away. This wasn't the first time someone assumed I didn't belong somewhere, Naomi said quietly. I've been followed in stores, questioned about my ability to pay, assumed to be the help rather than the executive. But this was the first time it happened in such a public way on a platform I built, and that created both responsibility and opportunity. Responsibility to address it systemically, opportunity to demonstrate that consequences are possible. When the interview aired that evening, it was viewed by 4 million people. Social media reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with particular praise for Naomi's refusal to simply accept an apology and move on. She'd used the platform to demand structural change, not just personal vindication. Meanwhile, Lillian watched the interview from her sister's apartment, where she'd been staying since her own building became too hostile. She'd seen herself through Naomi's measured words, not as a monster, exactly, but as a symptom of something larger and more insidious than individual cruelty. The realization was crushing. She'd spent 3 days cycling through denial, anger, and self-pity. She'd drafted furious social media posts defending herself, then deleted them. She'd called former friends seeking support and found only distance. She'd blamed Naomi for not stopping her sooner, blamed the internet for its cruelty, blamed everyone except the person actually responsible. But watching the interview, hearing Naomi speak about systemic bias with such clarity and absence of malice, something cracked in Lillian's defenses. Naomi wasn't gloating, wasn't celebrating Lillian's destruction, was simply acknowledging that consequences existed and that growth required confronting uncomfortable truths. Lillian's phone buzzed. Another message, this one from her mother. You need help, professional help, not for the internet, for yourself. The words stung because they were true. Lillian had spent 42 years building her identity around being right, being discerning, being the person who noticed what others missed. But what if her discernment was actually prejudice? What if her righteousness was just entitlement dressed up in concern? She opened her laptop and began searching for therapists who specialized in racial bias and prejudice reduction. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years dismissing such work as unnecessary, as something only actually racist people needed. Now she was one of those people, at least in the court of public opinion. But maybe, she thought with something approaching honesty, she'd always been. 2 weeks after the incident, Horizon Crest released its passenger treatment data publicly. The numbers were damning. Over 3 years, passengers of color had been 2.4 times more likely to be questioned about seat assignments. They'd been removed from aircraft at rates 60% higher than white passengers. Additional screening had been applied disproportionately based on names associated with Middle Eastern or South Asian origins. The data release made national news. Other airlines scrambled to defend their own records without actually releasing similar data. Industry groups issued carefully worded statements about commitment to equality while avoiding specific accountability. But Horizon Crest had drawn a line. Naomi appeared at a press conference flanked by civil rights leaders and passenger advocacy groups, announcing not just the data, but the comprehensive action plan to address it. "We failed," she said bluntly. "For years, we allowed bias to operate unchecked in our systems and our culture. We told ourselves we were better than this while our data proved otherwise. Today, we're committing to transparency and accountability. We're not asking for applause or praise. We're acknowledging failure and committing to sustained effort toward change." A reporter raised his hand. "Ms. Carter, cynics might say this is just good PR following a viral incident. How do you respond?" "I'd say they're partially right. The incident created visibility that forced action. But the problems existed long before I was personally affected. What's changed isn't the issues. It's our willingness to address them publicly rather than quietly hoping they'll resolve themselves." Naomi paused. "If it takes viral videos to create accountability, then we've already failed at leadership. But better late than never." The press conference concluded with announcements of partnerships, with the NAACP to develop training protocols, with Muslim advocacy groups to address profiling concerns, with disability rights organizations to improve accessibility and treatment of passengers with diverse needs. It was comprehensive, expensive, and genuine. Wall Street responded with cautious approval. Passenger bookings increased. Competitors quietly began developing their own initiatives, though none with the same transparency or scope. 6 weeks after the incident, Lillian sat in her therapist's office describing the moment she'd pointed her phone at Naomi's face. Dr. Sarah Kim listened without judgment, occasionally making notes, letting Lillian fumble through explanations and justifications until she finally arrived at truth. "I saw someone who didn't match my mental image of who belongs in first class," Lillian said slowly. "And instead of questioning my image, I questioned her. I made her prove her legitimacy because I'd already decided she was illegitimate." "Why do you think you made that decision?" Dr. Kim asked. "Because..." Lillian's throat tightened. "Because I've been taught, implicitly, subtly, that certain spaces belong to certain people, that wealth and class and belonging have markers. And she didn't have those markers, so I assumed she was lying." "What were the markers you were looking for?" Lillian closed her eyes. "Expensive clothes, designer accessories, a certain way of carrying herself, confidence that comes from always being welcomed. Things that white people, especially white women like me, associate with legitimacy because we've been centered in those spaces our entire lives. And when you didn't see those markers, I saw a threat. Someone disrupting the order I expected. Someone who made me uncomfortable because her presence challenged my assumptions about how the world should be organized." Dr. Kim nodded. "That's significant insight. What do you do with it now?" "I don't know," Lillian admitted. "I've lost my job, my reputation, most of my friends. I'm living with my sister. I can't go online without seeing myself turned into a meme. Part of me wants to defend myself, to explain that I'm not a bad person, that this was a mistake. But another part knows that defense misses the point. Which is, that impact matters more than intent. I didn't wake up that day planning to humiliate someone, but I did it anyway. And all my good intentions don't erase the harm I caused." The therapy continued twice weekly. Lillian read books on racial bias that she'd previously dismissed. She joined an accountability group for people working to unlearn prejudice. She wrote a private apology to Naomi, not for public consumption, not seeking forgiveness, just acknowledging harm without excuse. She didn't know if Naomi would ever read it. Didn't know if anything she did now could repair what she'd broken. But she did it anyway, because growth required action, even without guarantee of redemption. 1 year after the incident, Naomi stood before a university auditorium filled with business students studying organizational leadership. She'd been invited to speak about corporate transformation, but the questions inevitably circled back to that November afternoon when everything changed. A young black woman raised her hand from the third row. "Ms. Carter, do you think what happened to you actually changed anything? Or did people just move on once the video stopped trending?" Naomi smiled at the directness. "Both, honestly. Public attention is fleeting. The video trended for about 10 days before being replaced by the next viral moment. But structural change doesn't require constant attention. It requires sustained commitment. Let me show you something." She pulled up a slide displaying Horizon Crest's passenger complaint data from the past year. The numbers told a story of progress. Complaints about discriminatory treatment down 43%. Passenger removals down 61% overall, with the racial disparity nearly eliminated. Customer satisfaction scores up across all demographic categories. These changes didn't happen because people were watching, Naomi explained. They happened because we built systems that made bias harder to exercise and accountability easier to enforce. The Independent Advocacy Office processed over 800 complaints this year. 80% were resolved to the passenger's satisfaction. 20 crew members were terminated for repeated violations. 50 more went through intensive retraining. Another student, this one a young man in the back, spoke up. "But that's just your airline. What about the industry overall? Did anything change beyond Horizon Crest?" "That's the better question," Naomi acknowledged. "And the answer is complicated. 3 major airlines have implemented similar oversight programs. 2 have released their own bias data. The Industry Trade Association developed new training standards, but plenty of airlines are still operating the same way they always have, hoping they won't be the next viral incident." "So, it wasn't enough," a third student said, not quite a question. "It's never enough," Naomi replied. "Systemic change is measured in decades, not months. What happened to me created a window of attention. We use that window to build infrastructure for long-term transformation, but the work continues every single day, often invisibly, in decisions crew members make and systems that guide them." A young woman near the front asked the question Naomi had been anticipating. "Whatever happened to the woman who attacked you? Lillian Moore?" Naomi paused, choosing words carefully. She faced consequences, lost her job, dealt with public scrutiny, but she also, from what I understand, did something harder than defending herself. She examined her behavior and began the work of change. I received a letter from her about 6 months after the incident. It was private, not for publicity. She took responsibility without excuse. I appreciated that. "Did you forgive her?" "Forgiveness isn't mine to grant or withhold. She didn't harm me personally as much as she revealed something systemic. What matters more than whether I forgive her is whether she's genuinely different now, whether she treats people with more humanity than she showed that day." The presentation continued for another 30 minutes, but afterward, students lingered with individual questions. The young black woman from earlier approached Naomi as the crowd thinned. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've been profiled at airports twice. Security pulled me aside, searched my bags thoroughly, asked invasive questions. Both times I was flying to debate tournaments. I'm pre-law, I have a 3.9 GPA, and they treated me like a threat. Watching what happened to you, seeing there be consequences, it helped. It didn't fix everything, but it helped." Naomi felt the familiar weight of responsibility. "I'm sorry that happened to you. It shouldn't have. But it did. And it probably will again. So what do I do?" "You document it. You report it. You refuse to let it be invisible." Naomi pulled out a business card. "This is our passenger advocacy office. If it happens on any airline, not just mine, contact them. We track industry-wide patterns and file formal complaints with the FAA when we see systemic issues. Your experience matters, even if it feels like nobody's listening. The student took the card with trembling fingers. You really think things can change? I think they have to, and I think enough people demanding it can make the impossible inevitable. That student asked if things can change. You just heard Naomi say yes, but only if enough people demand it. Here's the truth. This story has been watched by you and thousands of others. But if you don't share it, it stops here. That student who was profiled, there are thousands like her, flying today, being questioned and humiliated, and they'll never see this story unless you share it. So like this video if you believe her experience mattered. Subscribe if you think these stories deserve platforms, and share it, because that student deserves to know she's not alone, and your share might be how she finds out. Across town, in a small apartment she'd moved into after rebuilding some financial stability, Lillian sat at her kitchen table scrolling through job listings. She'd been unemployed for 7 months before, finally finding work at a nonprofit focused on restorative justice. The pay was half what she'd made before. The work was harder, more emotionally demanding, but it was honest work, and it kept her accountable. Her therapist had suggested she might eventually share her story publicly, not as redemption arc or sympathy grab, but as cautionary tale and example of genuine change. Lillian wasn't ready yet. Maybe she never would be, but she'd started volunteering with an organization that helped people confront their own biases, sharing her experience in small group settings where anonymity was protected. I was that person, she'd told one group last month, the one who saw someone different and assumed threat instead of humanity. I destroyed someone's dignity because I couldn't question my own assumptions, and it cost me everything I thought defined me. Do you regret what happened? Someone had asked. Every day, but regret without change is just self-pity. So I'm trying to be different, trying to see people as they are, rather than as I expect them to be. It's harder than it sounds. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Saw Naomi Carter's university speech on YouTube. She mentioned you, kindly. Thought you should know. Lillian found the video and watched the relevant section 3 times. Naomi had acknowledged her existence without vindictiveness, had even noted her letter and efforts toward change. It wasn't forgiveness. Naomi had been clear about that, but it was acknowledgement that growth was possible. Lillian cried quietly at her kitchen table, not from sadness exactly, but from the exhausting relief of being seen as something more than the worst moment of her life. Back at Horizon Crest headquarters, Naomi reviewed the quarterly diversity and inclusion report her team had prepared. The numbers continued trending positive, though progress was uneven. Some regional hubs had embraced the changes, enthusiastically. Others resisted, viewing the new protocols as burdensome. 2 supervisors had quit rather than comply with enhanced oversight. We're still getting pushback, her VP of Operations reported during their weekly meeting. Crew members who feel like they're being watched constantly. Supervisors who say the advocacy office undermines their authority. Good, Naomi said, surprising him. If people who were comfortable with the old system are uncomfortable with the new one, we're doing something right. Authority that can't handle oversight shouldn't exist. Some of them are threatening to unionize around these specific issues. Let them. Unions are important, and if they want to organize, that's their right. But they don't get to organize around the right to discriminate. That's non-negotiable. The VP nodded, making notes. For what it's worth, passenger feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. People feel safer, feel heard. We're seeing increased loyalty from demographics we'd been losing to competitors. That's because we're actually serving them instead of merely tolerating them, Naomi said. Turns out people notice when you treat them like human beings. Later that evening, Naomi boarded a flight to Chicago, routine business travel, booked under her own name as always. She debated whether to continue her anonymous passenger experience practice after being publicly identified. but decided the principle mattered more than the impossibility of true anonymity now. The gate agent recognized her immediately. "Ms. Carter, welcome. We've upgraded you to first class, of course." "That's kind, but I'll stay in my assigned seat," Naomi said gently. "I prefer to experience what most passengers experience." She found seat 14B in economy, wedged herself into the narrow space, and pulled out a book. Around her, passengers settled in with the usual complaints about legroom and overhead bin space. A teenager across the aisle kept glancing at her, clearly recognizing her but too shy to say anything. Halfway through boarding, a flight attendant approached. A young man named Chris, whose name tag identified him as new hire. "Excuse me, Ms. Carter. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm Muslim, and before the changes you implemented, I was nervous about working for an airline, afraid I'd face discrimination from passengers or colleagues. But your company made me feel like I belonged, like I'd be protected if problems arose." "You do belong," Naomi said, "and you will be protected. That's not special treatment, that's basic dignity. But thank you for telling me. Moments like this remind me why the work matters." The flight departed on time, turbulence-free, unremarkable in every way except that it was exactly what air travel should be: safe, respectful, functional. When they landed, Naomi deplaned with everyone else. No special treatment, no expedited exit. Just another passenger completing another journey. In the terminal, she paused at a coffee shop and overheard two women discussing an incident on another airline. A passenger had been removed after complaining about discriminatory treatment. The women were debating whether the passenger had been justified or simply difficult. "I fly Horizon Crest now," one woman said. "Ever since that video with their CEO, they actually seem to care about treating people right." The other woman nodded. "I saw that. Crazy how one moment can change a whole company." Naomi smiled to herself. One moment hadn't changed anything. Thousands of moments had. Daily decisions, policy implementations, training sessions, complaint resolutions, conversations that happened without cameras or viral attention. The incident had created visibility, but the work created change. She boarded the train to downtown Chicago, anonymous among commuters, and thought about the student who'd asked if anything had really changed. The answer was yes, and no, and not enough, and more than before. Change was messy, incomplete, ongoing, but it was real. A year ago, she'd sat in seat 2A being accused of fraud while passengers recorded and crew hesitated. Today, systems existed to prevent that. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. And meaning accumulated over time into something that resembled justice, or at least progress toward it. Her phone buzzed with a message from her communications director. "New airline just announced they're adopting our passenger advocacy model. CEO cited you by name, thought you'd want to know." Naomi replied simply, "Good, that's the goal." Because it was never about one viral video or one moment of consequences. It was about building infrastructure that outlasted attention, systems that functioned when cameras weren't rolling, change that persisted after trending topics faded. She'd sat in that seat and endured humiliation not because she was uniquely strong, but because she had power that most passengers lacked. The power to create consequences, to demand accountability, to transform her personal experience into systemic reform. The work would continue long after she retired, long after people forgot the video, long after Lillian Moore's name faded from public memory. It would continue in crew members choosing respect over assumption, in passengers feeling safe enough to complain when treated poorly, in systems that valued dignity as much as efficiency. That evening, back in her hotel room, Naomi opened her laptop and began drafting the next quarterly report. The numbers told stories: passenger complaints, resolution rates, demographic satisfaction scores, crew compliance with new protocols. Each data point represented a person, a moment, a choice to do better than before. She thought about the woman at the university who'd been profiled twice, about Chris, the flight attendant who felt protected, about Lillian, somewhere in the city, trying to be different than she'd been. About the thousands of passengers who would fly tomorrow, most experiencing nothing remarkable, a few facing the kind of discrimination that had once been routine but was slowly, incrementally, becoming unacceptable. The work was never finished, but tonight it was enough to know it continued. To know that one moment of consequences had become 1,000 moments of change. To know that speaking up, standing firm, and demanding better had created ripples that spread farther than any viral video could reach. Naomi closed her laptop and looked out at Chicago's skyline, lights glittering against the darkness. Somewhere out there, people were boarding planes, sitting in seats they'd paid for, hoping they'd be treated with basic human respect. And because of systems built from one terrible moment of visibility, more of them would be. Not all, not yet, but more, and tomorrow, more still. That was how change worked. Not in dramatic transformations, but in countless small corrections that accumulated into something that looked, eventually, like justice. She thought about power and who held it, and how it could be used to protect rather than punish. She'd spent years avoiding visibility, believing that leadership meant letting others represent the company while she worked quietly behind the scenes. But that afternoon in seat 2A had taught her something essential. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be present, be human, be vulnerable enough to experience what others endure every day. And then, when the moment demands it, be powerful enough to ensure it changes.